Well, hello everyone. Good morning, and thank you all for taking some time out of your very busy days to be here. We know with so many competing demands, all of the competing demands there are for and how limited the hours in a day can feel, we're truly grateful that you've chosen to spend some of that time with us. My name is Hala Henderson, and I am the Public Policy Director with Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. I'm also joined here by my wonderful colleague, Bailey Sutter, who's producing today's event. Thanks so much, Bailey. Here at MCN, we're really proud to represent the nonprofit sector through advocacy, research, and connection. And we know that when nonprofits have the resources and tools that they need, our entire state thrives. We're also so thrilled to be joined by Secretary of State Steve Simon. Secretary Simon has served as Minnesota's Secretary of State since 2015, where he oversees elections, voter registration, and business services for the state. His office has been nationally recognized for expanding voter access, maintaining secure and reliable elections, and helping Minnesota to consistently rank among the top states in voter turnout. Prior to this role, he served in the Minnesota House of Representatives, building a long-standing record of public service and commitment to civic participation. Today, we're hoping to better understand some of the federal legislation currently being discussed and its potential impact on Minnesota. We also want to use this space to really level set. How likely is this legislation to move forward? What does it signal about our systems and potential future challenges? And how do we as nonprofits and as neighbors continue supporting Minnesota's strong tradition of civic engagement with clarity and steadiness rather than fear? Before I hand it over to Secretary Simon, I do want to briefly ground us in the role that nonprofits play in this work. Nonprofits are often a resource where when people have questions about elections, whether it's how to register to vote, where to go, what are their rights, or even whether someone is eligible to vote. That might look like helping someone to fill out a voter registration form, hosting a community conversation, sharing trusted information online, or simply answering questions at the front desk. It's not always the flashiest work, but it is foundational. And importantly, it's work that reaches people who may not otherwise be reached. New voters, rural voters, communities of color, young people, and sometimes older folks as well. Folks who may not see themselves reflected in traditional outreach. That's part of what makes the nonprofit sector so essential to a healthy democracy. We do all of this work through a nonpartisan lens, and that's not a limitation, it's a strength. And at a time when unbiased information can be difficult to find, being a trusted nonpartisan source is one of the most important roles that we can play. At the same time, nonpartisan does not mean neutral about our missions. It's not the same as bipartisan, and it doesn't always require us to center every single perspective equally in every conversation, especially when we move into advocacy. Organizations can and should be clear about the issues that drive our work. For example, when we're talking about if an environmental justice organization is talking about public policy decisions and how they impact clean air and water, or a housing organization is talking about how elections shape access to affordable housing, or a food shelf talking about policies that affect food security. That's not partisan. That's mission-aligned civic engagement. That's still mission-aligned nonpartisan engagement as well. I share all of this because over the past year, many of us have been navigating competing and at times confusing narratives. We've seen challenges to nonpartisanship, including efforts to weaken the Johnson Amendment. We've also seen broader federal pressures from limits on nonprofit work related to environmental justice and DEI to requests that raise questions about voter access or access to voter data, or organizations simply trying to serve their communities and ensure that Minnesotans have what they need. That landscape can feel uncertain and frustrating. Oh, I'm seeing a question from Bailey, so I'm going to pause here. Secretary Simon, are you still with us? Melanie, are you able to check in with Secretary Simon?
Yes, I am doing that right now. One moment.
Perfect. Well, while we wait for some tech issues, I just want to again thank folks for being here. Um, it's such a pivotal and even in a little ways overdue conversation. And hopefully at the end, we are all able to walk away with some context, some clarity, and hopefully some security in our ability to continue the already crucial work that nonprofits do. We will hopefully have a little time at the end for some questions, so please do hold on to them and maybe while we're waiting, take a few minutes to start thinking through the pieces that you really want to hear or think or what you need to know by the end of our time together. We're so grateful for your time and perspective, and I'm personally very much looking forward to the conversation. And Bailey, why don't you just give us a heads up when we're good to go?
All right. Hi, Secretary Simon. Can you hear us okay?
Oh, I think you might be muted. We cannot currently hear you. We cannot. Do you by any chance have headphones that you might be hooked up to? Hmm, we can't, unfortunately.
So this is Melanie Hazlip. Let me chime in for just a second. Julie
Wonderful.
Struther, our Deputy Secretary, and Nicole Freeman, our Government Relations Director, are both getting logged onto this Zoom account right now, or this Zoom meeting right now. I know that they would be much better able to address these particular topics than I can. So they're logging on as Secretary Simon's backup. He's very apologetic. He feels terrible. He got stuck in terrible traffic coming into the office today and pulled over, as you could see, on the side of the road in his car because it was really important to him that he not miss this meeting. But he's obviously having some tech difficulties from the side of the road in his car. So momentarily, you should have Julie Strother and Nicole Freeman, who are also, they're not Secretary Simon, but also experts on this subject. So if you can do it, wait just a couple more minutes. So sorry about that.
We will roll with it. We are grateful that you are here. Thanks, Melanie. And I think I see Nicole.
And they might be sharing, they might be together. So
Hello.
and
Nicole,
Secretary Simon did just say he's going to try moving to a different location and rejoining because he really doesn't want to miss. So I just heard Nicole's voice, but we could get started with Nicole and Julie.
let's do that. Bailey, if you don't mind, spotlighting Nicole, and then we will transition over.
All right. Give me just 1 second here. Tech is so fun, no matter what side you are on. Um,
And just for some context, once more, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the federal legislation that's been proposed, specifically targeting elections. That includes things like the SAVE Act, um, the MEGA Act or Make Elections Great Again Act, as well as a couple executive orders, and how that might impact nonprofits, as well as some of the realities of where that legislation might land.
I think Nicole may have dropped off.
No, she's on. I can see her.
Oh. Okay. Well, give me just a moment here. I don't see they went away on my screen of things. So why don't y'all continue? the conversation and I'll figure out getting it on the main screen.
Wonderful.
If so, I can give a very high level. I can't get quite as into the weeds as they can, but I can get us started. I know we were talking about executive orders and the Save America Act. If you have a place that you would like me to start, I'm happy to just, I can fill in the meantime.
Wonderful. Bailey, can you please pin Melanie? And why don't we start with some of the executive orders and transition into the SAVE Act?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I'll wait a moment until I'm pinned.
I think you have to make them a panelist, Bailey. One moment, folks. Apologies for all of the tech difficulties. Appreciate it, Sarah. Nicole, let's do it. Let's have you kick us off with some of the EOs, or executive orders, and we'll go from there. And I do see you, and if Bailey's able to transition you to a panelist, there we go.
Okay,
Wonderful.
perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Freeman. I am the Government Relations Director at the Office of the Secretary of State. I'll get started until the Secretary is able to join over. As a lot of you know, we've had two executive orders in both March of 2025 as well as this past March. The initial executive order made some pretty big changes to our election system. And I don't have the exact details of the executive order up in front of me right now, but what I can say at a high level is that many of those components of the executive order were immediately challenged in court. Our office, being represented by the Minnesota Attorney General, joined a number of other states and immediately challenged that in court. And essentially, um, the the legal basis of our challenge is that in the Constitution leaves the time, place, and manner of elections up to the states, and so Congress can weigh in and pass a law related to federal elections, but the Constitution doesn't give the president. And again, this was our legal argument there. We believed that the Constitution doesn't give the president that ability. And so that order, a number of provisions in that order were struck down last year. Then this past March, I guess almost exactly a month ago, the president again issued an order, and the order this time dealt with mail balloting and voting by absentee. And it gave both instructions to the states, as well as instructions to the U.S. Postal Service. And it focused around the state and the federal government creating a list of eligible voters that then would be the only folks that could be eligible to cast a ballot using the United Postal Service. Again, Minnesota joined just a few days after that order was issued with 22. The last I heard, it was 22 other states. There might have been more that have joined on now to challenge that in court again. Again, under that same basis that states set the time, place, and manner, and as well as that the president doesn't have the ability to tell the U.S. Postal Service even or the states sort of how to run things essentially. And so that is in court right now. But what we have communicated sort of as that's being challenged in court is We've communicated with our local election officials to just sort of continue preparing for the election as we have been planning for it. So those are the two executive orders. And I don't know if we want to do a check on where we're at um, or I can start talking about the other federal
Why don't
legislation.
we keep moving forward? I do see Julie. It sounds like we might not be able to spotlight her. Um, but if you're okay chiming in, Julie, we would love some of your expertise as well.
Yeah, Nicole covered it. I do think that the key thing to know with the executive orders is the president under the Constitution doesn't have the authority to without signing a law from Congress to change election laws. And executive orders can only direct essentially the agencies under the president's authority to do things. But as Nicole said, the Postal Service is actually a unique entity governed by a board of governors. And so the executive order doesn't apply to the Postal Service either. And so our guidance with these executive orders, as Nicole said, is to continue to plan for the election under the laws we have, just like we were before the executive order. And if we were to see another executive order like that, we anticipate that the guidance would be the same. And I am sitting in Secretary Simon's office, and I'm hoping that he'll be in here in just a second to take my spot in the chair. And join the presentation, and apologies for the technical difficulties this morning.
Not a problem. While we wait, if it's okay, I'd love to offer a couple of questions that I'm getting in our Q&A. One is just a understanding of tech glitches, so want to lift that up. But one is around the most recent Supreme Court decision. Does that affect us, and what should we be prepared for?
This is one that Secretary Simon should speak to more directly, but it doesn't impact Minnesota right now. But I think our concern is the general sort of undercutting of the Voting Rights Act, which has been an incredibly important piece of legislation in protecting voters across the country. And so while it doesn't impact Minnesota directly right now, I think that the general concern is that we've continued to see the undermining and the sort of gutting of the Voting Rights Act. And to note, that's part of the reason why Minnesota, Nicole will correct me if it would, I think 2 years ago, passed a Minnesota-specific Voting Rights Act to try to backfill some of those protections that were lost at the federal level for the state level. And I see Secretary Simon has joined, so I'm going to pop out of this chair, and you're talking to this.
Okay.
Hello,
Hi.
Secretary Simon.
Can you hear and see me?
We absolutely can.
Okay. First, let me say, what a comedy of errors. Of all the days to get stuck in a really epic traffic jam on Highway 62, this was not the day. Sirens and state troopers and narrowed lanes. And I had to make the judgment call. I'm not going to make it. I got to pull over into a random neighborhood and do this from the car. And then the audio didn't work. Anyway, if I'm out of breath, seem like I'm out of breath is because I am. Um, Thank you. Great to see you all. Thanks for your partnership. It sounds like I just got some text that Nicole and Julie were talking about executive orders. Okay. Let me pivot then to statutes, actual proposed statutes. So there are three that I wanted to talk about today. And by the way, just to level set, we are 187 days from the election. That's going to go back by very, very quickly, we know. So lots to think about. And there are challenges, and I would say even threats coming from Washington, D.C. that we have to plan for. But I've been asked to talk about, and thank you to Nicole and Julie for talking about executive orders, some of the statutes. So let me start out with the one that's making a lot of headlines these days, and that is the SAVE Act, sometimes called the Save America Act. The headline of the SAVE Act is the first ever in the history of the United States mandatory documentary proof of citizenship requirement for registration and or voting, depending on the precise version of the act that's been winding through Congress. So documentary proof of citizenship, meaning papers. You got to show papers of some kind to demonstrate that you are a U.S. citizen. Now, let me just say that I well understand how on the surface level that has a lot of appeal. And I think it is in everyone's interest at this meeting to think likewise, to understand why that polls very well, and to understand that to a person who heard nothing more, that might sound really reasonable. After all, you don't need a million things to vote. You need three big ones. You need to be a citizen, you need to be a resident of where you say you are, and you need to, of course, be 18 years old. So, what's the big deal in making someone show that? Here's the big deal. We have, for example, 69 million women in America who have a different last name now than the one that they were born with. Not a problem if that person has a passport, which is the ultimate document that shows citizenship. But what of the tens of millions of those women who do not have a passport? What would they have to do or show or produce? And the answer is they would have to bring both a birth certificate and a marriage record of some kind. And that's one for each marriage. If someone's been married more than once and changed their name more than once, it would be more than one marriage record. And I would even concede that most people will be able to do that, but many people will not be able to do that. And this isn't just conjecture or speculation. We have evidence from the experience of the state of Kansas. A few years ago, Kansas experimented with its own mini version of the SAVE Act, where they had a documentary proof of citizenship requirement. And before a federal court threw out that law as unconstitutional, they held an election in Kansas under that law. And when they held the election in Kansas under that law requiring documentary proof of citizenship, 31,000 eligible Kansans, eligible. I'm talking about people like me and many of you, born, raised, been voting for years. They were shut out of the process. Now, we are double the size of Kansas, so you can do the math on that. And the question I have is it worth potentially disenfranchising and shutting out tens of thousands of people to catch a couple of handfuls? Because the evidence we have in Minnesota is it really is a couple of handfuls of people who, over a long period of time, have done the wrong thing. Um, in my judgment, the answer is no. But what I'm sure many of you want to know is what are the prospects of this passing? As you may have followed in the news, it is currently bottled up in the Senate, having passed the House. It looks like it will probably stay bottled up in the Senate, but we and others around the country are watchful because there's always the possibility that pieces of the SAVE Act or Save America Act could be cleaved off and put on some other piece of legislation that is traveling and that under Senate rules could make it. And there's a lot of reasons why that even that seems less likely to happen. So nothing's ever truly dead in Washington or in St. Paul, right? It can always be revived procedurally or otherwise, but we're keeping an eye on that. And that, of course, is making a lot of news. So that's one particular law. Another one that I wanted to address is the MEGA Act, Make Elections Great Again, which has been proposed in the U.S. House. That one has not really moved much from the launching pad, but I just wanted to let you know what's in it. The Make Elections Great Again Act is one that would include many aspects, most aspects of the SAVE Act, but it would add a few things. First, it would nullify the laws in 7 or 8 states that have universal vote by mail. Now, we're not one of those states, but states like Oregon and Washington and Colorado and Utah and soon California are those states where the default is voting by mail, where every registered voter is mailed a ballot. Again, not Minnesota's way, but there is a growing list of states, and this would basically undo that in those states. It would say from Washington, we don't like that, then you can't do that. Another thing it would do is it would require states like Minnesota to surrender certain data, including personal data, to the Department of Justice and others. I'll get to that in a different context in a moment. And it would ban ranked choice voting everywhere in the United States. So whether it's on the municipal level or the state level, that would be gone. Again, this has not moved beyond the launch pad. It was with great fanfare announced a few months ago, but most people don't expect that to get very far because the leadership in the House has staked its claim to what it sees as election reform on the SAVE Act or Save America Act. So this mega act is really sort of an afterthought and one that is thought not likely to get much traction, certainly in the remaining months of this Congress. But it is a marker of a certain impulse in Congress to do some of these things. The last statutory provision I want to address is something called the Minnesota Voter Integrity Act. And that is something that Representative Pete Stauber of the 8th Congressional District put forward along with three other members of the Minnesota delegation. And before I describe what it is, let me talk about its origins. It has its origins in something that's been going on for nearly a year. Maybe you've tracked this a little bit. Starting last summer, the Department of Justice reached out in stages and in waves to almost every state. I think they're up to 49 states now. Why they've spared North Carolina, I will never know. But 49 states have received demands from the U.S. Department of Justice, including Minnesota last summer, to turn over the entire unredacted set of voter rolls in Minnesota. That's millions of people who are registered to vote. Unredacted means they don't just want the public information, which would be name, address, year of birth, and voting history. Instead, what they want is the sensitive personal information as well. So social security information, driver's license information, and the like. So Minnesota, again, almost every state got this demand. Minnesota did as well. And when we got it, we looked first to the law, not our personal preferences, not what we like or dislike, but what does the law have to say, if anything, about this? And our conclusion pretty swiftly was that federal law, not to mention state law, does not entitle the Department of Justice to this very sensitive data on millions of people. And we aren't some sort of island of defiance out there. 32 of the 49 states have reached the exact same legal conclusion, looking at the exact same laws. And so we have declined to give the Justice Department this information on the strength of what the law says. The Department of Justice disagrees, naturally, with our interpretation of the laws, and they have sued us and 29 of those 32 states. So right now, this is all pending in litigation. So far, the Justice Department has won 0 cases and lost, at latest count, 5 or maybe 6, depending on how you count. Ours is now pending in Minnesota. And by the way, there's no harm or shame in this. This is exactly why we have courts, right? To figure out whose interpretation of the law is right or best. This is where we settle these kinds of disputes. And of course, once the litigation is over, we will comply with whatever the court says. But we do like our chances. We think our position is correct. Anyway, back to this law. So Representative Stauber and others were not happy with our legal position. And so they introduced legislation to say that unless we in Minnesota handed over this sensitive material, which we believe would not comply with federal law, unless we do that, Minnesota and Minnesotans would be punished by reducing the amount of money we get from the Help America Vote Act, which was passed back in 2002, but periodic appropriations give us in the state of Minnesota and nearly every state money for election administration, election security, and the like. I'll just say that I called it at the time sort of a silly or ridiculous stunt. As I said, that we're in the same boat as 32 other states that have taken the same legal position. I know of no other congressional district of the other 31 states where any member of their congressional district has introduced legislation that would, in essence, starve their own constituents of election security money because they disagree with the Secretary of State's legal position. So needless to say, it was a stunt and a one-day press release, and it's not going anywhere. But it's unfortunate that it's gotten to this point. We'll see what the courts say, right? But we're not going to do anything without guidance from the courts. So that's on the statutory level. I know you've already talked about executive orders. I just want to say one thing since we're talking about the federal government. It's not statutes, it's not laws being proposed or bills being proposed, it's not executive orders. But we do have other relationships traditionally with the federal government, and traditionally they've been pretty sound. Some of you may know, the 2016 election changed a lot because the 2016 election was the election where a foreign government, in this case Russia, tried unsuccessfully, but tried to get into our stuff. They tried to basically hack systems across the country. Physical infiltration was attempted. I'm not talking about influence operations on social media. I'm talking about literally attempts to hack statewide election systems. And Minnesota was among the targets. Fortunately, all the systems worked. The defenses held. They didn't get in, but it was a wake-up call to this country. And in the aftermath of that episode in 2016, the federal government declared that our election systems in this country would forevermore be considered critical infrastructure. And critical infrastructure is a term that really means something in the federal government. It was a designation designed and implemented after 9/11 in 2001. And it means sort of what it sounds like. It's a designation for certain parts of our national life that get extra attention, resources, and protection. Things that you would think would be on there, like hospitals, the water supply, the power grid, the banking system, military bases. You get the idea here. And now the election system joins that select group of aspects of our national life that are entitled to extra protection and resources. And so for a long time, for the better part of the last decade, we have had a great relationship with the Department of Homeland Security, specifically a sub-agency called CISA, CISA, which has to do with cybersecurity and other security measures. And that relationship was good through multiple presidencies, including, and I would say especially during Trump 1.0, where we had a really good and strong and positive and productive working relationship with those agencies. Despite our occasional differences on certain policy issues, we were all rowing in the same direction. But that has not been the case over the last year and a half with this new administration, where there has been a seeming retreat from the mission of having these agencies help states with election security. So I'll give you some examples. Until recently, until 2025, we were accustomed, all the states were, to getting help from the federal government and intelligence agencies on things like routine intelligence briefings, where we would get secret level briefings on the threat actors out there and the sort of threat assessment of outside actors. Things like penetration testing, which maybe some of you in your organizations have used, which is sort of hiring someone to hack you, basically, to come on in to find the weaknesses or the soft spots. Or things like helping us within Minnesota to do tabletop exercises and security training with our partners in the counties, cities, and townships. All three of those things have been not offered. There's been no engagement, and that's why I say there's seemingly been a retreat from the federal government in that sphere, which I think is unfortunate. I want everyone on this call to know that that void has not gone unfilled. Understanding that the federal government is not likely to be a partner in the next 187 days on those issues, we have sought out partnerships and arrangements elsewhere. And so we feel very confident over the next 187 days that we'll be delivering an election that Minnesota expect. They expect an election that is fair, accurate, honest, and secure. And we're going to deliver that. It's going to take work and coordination and effort and energy and sweat like it always does. And there might be some added hoops and hurdles and obstacles, but I really am an optimist about this. We have the laws, we have the tools, we have the partnerships, we have the resolve, certainly in Minnesota, to make sure that nothing and no one interferes with our democracy. So with that, I know in our limited time, and thank you for your accommodation of this, speaking of obstacles, the logistical obstacles this morning, but I wanted to leave some time here for questions, answers, advice, thoughts, comments, anything you have. And thanks for your understanding and thanks for your time and attention. And thank you all for being such great partners. It should go without saying, but I will say it, MCN and so many of you on this call at this meeting have been and continue to be such outstanding partners for us in what we call the democracy business, and delivering for all the people that we serve and all Minnesotans a democracy that's durable and lasting and gives voice to people every day. And you remain incredible and steady and worthy and valuable partners for us. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Secretary Simon, as well. And thank you for always saying yes to when we ask you to do things and to connect with community. Um, I think I'm not seeing a ton of questions, so I will ask this one. What advice do you have for nonprofits who are trying to navigate, right? How do we do this work and how do we do it effectively but also how do we continue to affirm that our election systems are safe, are secure, when maybe the average voter is hearing something different from the media.
Right. Well, I think the number one thing right now, and I predict through the next 187 days, that all of you on this call can do to help us to row in the same direction is to emphasize to people what the rules are and what the opportunities and options are, what the truth is, which is the antidote to some of the mis and disinformation out there. And let me give you one, hopefully very concrete, sadly concrete example. So it's not lost on many of you, I assume, that one of the questions, maybe you're getting them because I know we sure are, people will ask things like, well, what happens if there's, federal interference, like direct interference in the election? What happens if, for example, there are ICE or federal personnel in and around polling places? And I think the number one thing that the nonprofit community can do is help us in getting good information out. For example, here's a tangible, credible example. Just remember that there are three ways to vote in Minnesota, three physical ways to do it. In person on election day, in person before election day during the absentee voting period, which in Minnesota is 46 days, so roughly the third week in September or so, and critically, voting from home. And that last one is really important in the hypothetical I just mentioned. I think it's really important for all of us to remind Minnesotans of their menu options, so to speak, which is to say, if a particular person or a particular community are worried or anxious or nervous about the physical location on election day, just remind people you don't have to go to a physical location on election day. You don't have to run a gauntlet of anyone, ICE or anyone else. You don't have to physically appear on election day. You can order the ballot to come to you and you can vote from your kitchen table. There's more to it, of course. We can talk about where to go and all the rest. But, with us today is Melanie Hayslip, known to many of you, our outstanding Director of Voter Outreach. And she is happy to talk with you about ways that you and your organizations can deal with her and her team. She does lunch and learns. She can do customized Zoom meetings. She can provide materials and others to anyone on this call or anyone not on this call who is interested in getting that information out. In addition, we have really good laws in Minnesota around who can be and who cannot be at the polling place. I'll spare you all the details now, but I'm quite confident we have drawn a really good, secure circle around polling places that should provide a degree of comfort to a lot of voters and to a lot of you who serve a lot of voters. So those are just some examples. I think the information space is really important.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think that's incredibly helpful information. And I'll say for myself, galvanizing that we just continue to do the good work and share accurate information as we do. Um, want to be able to end on time. So I am gonna, I think, wrap us here. But first, I want to plug that the OSS, so Office of the Secretary of State, has a town hall today at 7. And I think we're going to be able to share out information pretty shortly after this, but I wonder if anyone else from the office has that Zoom link that they can share for registration. So I want to plug that. And then MCN also has a series of resources related to elections and what nonprofits can do versus what nonprofits can't do. And so we will share that information either here or in a wrap up. Thanks, Melanie. It looks like space is very limited. Good to know. We will share that information and we will also have additional events in coming months as we get closer to Election Day to give nonprofits an opportunity to understand different different ways of doing outreach, and then also what are we learning from each other and what are we learning from community. So Secretary Simon, so grateful for some time with you. Participants, as always, thank you for being here. This session is being recorded and it will be available, and we will make sure once that recording is ready that it is sent to participants as well. And with that, I think we can stop recording and wrap. Thanks all. Have a good day.